This drive-in theater is radioactive. Now you can hear tonight's show on your AM car radio. Turn your ignition key to the accessory position. This will not drain your car battery. Now turn on your radio and zero in on the following AM station.
The moment our fellow geeks, dweebs, nerds, and other unfortunates have been fervently waiting for has finally arrived. It's time for TMI, Confessionals of the Nerd Kind. And now, your hosts, Jeff Nerfherder Chandler, Jim Kaiju Baker, and Christina Yojimbo Henry. You can continue. And now, let's get on with the show. Here is TMI.
All right, there we go. We're in,
now
everybody.
We're in. Now we're
We're starting
you
talking.
missed it, everybody. We just reviewed Spider-Man, and you missed it.
Because I forgot to hit record. In all seriousness, folks, you may notice, even though what could be the biggest movie of the year is already in general release, we are not discussing that.
I have not seen it yet.
Jeff has not seen it yet.
Yes.
And the reason we are not reviewing Spider-Man, not only because Jeff has not seen it yet, is because it is only the two of us today.
We need all three present for this discussion.
We need all three present. Christina is on a well-deserved family Christmas vacation, and I hope it goes better than the Griswolds.
Which he's never seen, by the way.
She'll be back in 2 weeks, and we will be discussing Spider-Man No Way Home at that time. In the meantime,
you
please,
get us idiots.
Please enjoy a lively discussion of the Beatles Get Back today. It is a very musical themed episode.
Oh, it is. Yes, it's melodious.
Yes, it is. And I have waited and waited and waited, and this is one of my sacred cows, you could call it. I am a huge, huge Monkees fan, as well as a Beatles fan. Yes, you can be both. And this...
You should be both.
We are covering for the first time the Monkees' one and only feature film from 1968, Head. And this just seemed the perfect opportunity to do so.
This has been sitting on your list, on your checklist for quite a while.
Yes,
And it's a brilliant pairing. A lot of people are like, how come you haven't talked about Terminator 2 yet? Or how come you haven't talked about all these other like classic movies that everybody covers? And it's like, well, we like to pair this stuff up. And sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Sometimes, listen, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of pairings that we thrown out there just because we wanted to talk about that movie.
Oh yeah.
But this is perfect. And this Get Back, like I remember talking about this like last year.
Yeah, I think 2019 was when it was first announced, when it was still going to be a theatrical, and then Disney purchased the rights.
Imagine sitting in the theater for 8 hours.
I cannot. But the thing is that the whole point of Get Back is that it's a fly on the wall experience. Yeah. So the length of it, I think, is really necessary. This is for not the casual viewer. Let me say that right up front. If you want the minutia, if you are a Beatles fan and you want that minutia of like sitting there with them for what seems like the course of a month as you're watching it, you really get a sense of what their relationship was and what their working relationship was during this time period. It really brings you
very
there.
Tumultuous. I mean, this is like storied Beatle lore that during this time is when they were fractured that led to their breakup. I will say right now to my co-host Jim that I apologize because I am not an obsessive compulsive Beatle fan. I would consider myself a casual fan. I know their songs, I know their albums, I know all their names, I know that there's people out in the world who don't even know who all four Beatles are. But this was, if you want to complain that it's 8 hours, just imagine the 60 hours Peter Jackson had to sit through.
Right.
And he
is an obsessive Beatles fan. So I don't think that this was a drag for him.
No, we thank him for this.
Yeah.
So we will get into it. You don't have to be obsessive compulsive about this band. You can just be like, well, I know I know basically, I remember the stories of them playing on the rooftop. Well, this kind of gets you there.
Yeah.
So, So yeah, it's worthy watch.
Definitely,
Yes,
definitely.
it is 8 hours. So
It is a commitment. I was looking forward to this because I obviously had to cut it in sections, watching it throughout the course of a week. And
well, I think we all did, yeah.
And I was looking forward to it every single day to come back to it.
No, it is like it's like an onion.
Yeah.
Because you just start peeling these things back, and we'll get into it because as a casual fan, I do have questions, and I know I've come to the source because anything I think that I can question or throw out there.
I'll be like the Swami in the steam room in head.
Just don't be smarmy.
I will try my best. I will try my best.
Like a Maharaja, and you shall teach me. Because this is Disney-fi, because that's what Get Back is on.
Yeah,
Disney
the
Plus.
The Beatles, are they owned by Disney now? Are they official characters?
I don't know.
The only Disney characters that drop F-bombs, though, I have to say.
That is true. But it's so enjoyable listening to them to see the F-bomb.
Especially in their Liverpudlian accents.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad that there were subtitles in certain parts of this.
Oh yeah, I watched it on I watched everything on subtitles. I watched the whole thing.
But now you got subtitles on top of subtitles, right?
Yes. So that was a little bit confusing to read sometimes, but I picked up the gist.
Okay.
So we already established that you are not like a super fan of the Beatles, but I just am curious to know what your relationship to this group has been throughout your life. Like, what was the first time you were aware? Was it seeing Yellow Submarine? Was it knowing a song, or what was it?
It probably was a song. I'll tell you right now. I know for a fact. My stepfather and his brother, my Uncle Tom, was a huge Beatles fan, so he had a lot of the albums. But it's just a band I've always known. You say right now, it's like, who's the greatest band in the world? And both my kids will say the Beatles. That's because I've banged it into their head. Right. I know there are people out there that say otherwise. They've just always been there. Everything I owned was on CD. I don't think I ever owned an album, and it probably was like the best of those double albums.
Yeah, it was same thing because, I've talked many times about my father shaping my likes and dislikes in terms of pop culture, and music is really no exception to that. He had a huge vinyl album collection. And he had a set of headphones. It's very similar to the one that I'm wearing now, which was completely over the ear. So you would plug in the jack to the record player, to the receiver, and you would just be in that world. And
you're immersed, right?
Yeah, you are, because you're looking at the album cover. If it's a gatefold, you're opening it up. You're reading the lyrics.
That's the lost, like buying an album and just listening to the songs and poring over the liner notes.
Yeah.
That came directly from the artists. Like, we didn't have the internet. You didn't have, Rolling Stone was huge, was revelatory for me.
Mm-hmm.
I devour when I got a Rolling Stone subscription. It didn't matter who was on the cover. It didn't matter what the article, Tom Wolfe wrote, I don't know, it was Bonfire of the Vanities. I think they printed the entire book over the course of, half a year. And it didn't matter. If it was in Rolling Stones, I would read it.
The liner notes pages in the beginning where you'd only get candid paparazzi type shots. In the beginning, I loved that section of Rolling Stone. Yeah, throughout the 80s and into the 90s, I had a subscription to that magazine. Yeah,
that was our bloodline. That was it.
Through my father, it was his copy. But I had Sgt. Pepper on vinyl. And going over that cover, looking at all those faces,
just looking at that cover was because
wondering who those people were, behind them. So I wasn't actually sure that the Beatles themselves in the suits were real in this picture. I didn't, I just assumed it was a composite picture, that it wasn't like a big staged photograph that was taken. And once I learned that, it completely blew my mind.
Yeah. What's even more fun is when you see outtakes from that photo shoot.
Yeah.
With them in different positions and things moved around, because that is such an iconic cover. And there's so much going on. Like, now that would be such a throwaway on a CD. You wouldn't even see it on a CD. Who the hell's buying CDs anymore?
Yeah, I know.
You just download the album from, Apple Tunes or whatever it is.
I think, as a matter of fact, probably vinyl at this point might sell more than CDs do, because vinyl's, been making a comeback slowly over the past few decades.
It's funny when you were just talking, because it's people like you that grew up with this stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, we're going to cassette. And then we went from cassette to CD. And then we went from CD to friggin' Zune and iTunes and but when you talk about putting the headphones on and you put that needle down and you get that hiss of
the occasional
pops,
pop, and
like that's the doorway. The doorway opens and all of a sudden you're just like, you're in. I can't say enough great things about this special, because half of these songs that you're seeing and you're hearing them create from scratch right in front of your very eyes are the songs that are they didn't go back and re-record this. That's the actual recording.
Yeah, because during some of these takes you would see like a little text from the bottom. This is the take used on Let It Be.
And so what's nice is that he sets you up at the beginning and puts you in context of where these people were and where this group was in their life, because they had a really short shelf life. The Beatles burst on the scene on Ed Sullivan, well, at least in the US. What was it, 63?
The beginning of 64.
And this was 69. They had not played a live concert in front of anybody since 66.
Right.
But again, as a casual fan, they would just launch into a song. There's one where I think this was later into the series, and all of a sudden you got Ringo Starr going, "Oh, come over here and listen to this," and he starts singing "Octopus's Garden," and you're like, "But is this a song that already exists, or is he really just pulling this out of his ass right now?" And that's the stuff that that kind of like caught me off guard, because I'm like, wait a minute, because the whole premise of this special, which is a documentary, which I'm not familiar with the actual documentary, and that's where I think there's a little bit of a disconnect, because I don't know. This is all footage that was shot in 69. It's not like Peter Jackson shot any of this.
Right.
This all existed, 60 plus hours of this. And from what I understand, this was like it was Beatle lore, right? Like bootlegs of these.
It was put out there. Apple at the time, not Disney, was looking to clean up the 60 plus hours, have somebody go through it. And Jackson raised his hand and volunteered. I'll do it, and that's what he did for 4 years.
4 years.
For 4 years.
This man worked on this. And I will say, in preparation for this podcast, I watched, and this was only after I watched all 8+ hours, I watched quite a few reviews on YouTube and some other blogs or whatever, where people who are more in the know, I guess, musically inclined. Listen, you can get into an argument with me that Ringo Starr is the worst drummer in the world or the greatest drummer in the world. And I couldn't tell you which side I fell on, because I don't know anything about drums. And you see both sides of the argument, where people, they argue that, this guy held the group together. You see him, he's cool, he's collective. He sat back, he never smiled, but he was always there. He was always on. Somebody started strumming a guitar, he would just immediately start, breaking in the percussion. Who was the guy? Michael Lindsay
Hogg was the director, and he was known at the time for he had just completed the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, which was like a filmed concert with the Stones, like a big top kind of a set. And they had guests. The Who was there, Jethro Tull was there, John came with Yoko and did a song with Eric Clapton. That was also like legendary, because it was never used. They shelved it, the Stones did, for decades, until it came out finally in the 90s. So the Beatles were familiar with Lindsay Hogg because he had just done that, and John's especially, because John was part of the Rock and Roll Circus. So they decided to use him to do this project that they were doing, which was in the beginning a documentary of them rehearsing songs that they would then perform live, and it was going to be a TV special, like a one-off TV special. The point of it, I think, was to get them back in front of a live audience, because I think that Paul especially felt that they had lost something by becoming strictly a studio band.
In losing that, though, look at the stuff that they did. You brought up Sgt. Pepper's. How could you ever perform that live, that album?
Yeah. Well, you could. Today you could, because
today you could. Yeah. But I mean, you would need a full orchestra.
During this special, Paul at one point breaks out Strawberry Fields on the piano.
Yeah.
So you could do a beautiful version of a lot of these songs with just acoustic or piano.
But I think by them, you know, they were you got this the fact that they were completely disillusioned with these live performances because they couldn't hear themselves. People were just losing their freaking minds. Girls were just screaming, and it was just chaos.
But as time goes on, I think that kind of lessened because people like the Stones were still going out and touring.
Right.
And
I'm not screaming as loud for
Mick Jagger
as I am.
But I think audiences were changing, just like the times. Like after 67, the Summer of Love, and there was a revolution in music, and music changed. And I think audiences changed because then you have the Woodstock.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So I think that it would have been
them
different
to be more experimental and come up with the stuff, you know, that they came up with that might not have flourished if they just continued that studio, you know, the live.
Oh, you're absolutely right, because this gave them the time, because back then in 64, 65, 66, when they were touring, even though they would only tour during the summer, it would kind of break into their recording schedule, and they'd have a deadline where they'd have to quickly finish an album so they could get out and go on tour. And this, when that equation was off the table, they could spend as much time as they wanted in the studio.
Yeah. And this is where it shows the brilliance of the band, and especially Paul McCartney. That again, I don't know if this is the way that the documentary is called Let It Be. Right?
Yeah, the actual feature that was released was called Let It Be.
Let It Be. But you know, he frames it in this time clock, this calendar. It's a countdown clock to this live performance, and they get 3 weeks to come up with however many songs.
And that was the challenge, I think. And I think this whole thing was driven by Paul, from listening to him talk about it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's funny because you do see a lot of times you get credit and it always says McCartney and Lennon, but there's a lot of times where John doesn't really seem to be adding too much to what Paul's already throwing out there.
And as a matter of fact, there are several, especially during the beginning of this, because this whole special, part of it is it seems extremely unorganized. It seems very seat of the pants, because they get into this. They don't have songs. First of all, they only have maybe songs that they're bringing in from home that they'd written, you know, in the last week or whatever.
I wrote this last night. What was it? George Harrison. He comes in with that old man. What is that old
brown shoe? He had one.
He's like, right. I wrote this last night. It's just mind-boggling that these guys, again, it is very seat of the pants, and he'll just start on the piano and he'll just start a riff. And listen, if you don't like Let It Be and you don't like Get Back, you hear these songs numerous times
because they work them out from nothing into the songs that they are talking about. Get Back, Paul makes it up on camera. It's like, that's not even a song that he brings in. He made it up right there in front of the cameras.
Absolute favorite lines from this is when he turns and he goes, "Is Tucson in Arizona?" And I'm like, it's such an iconic line, but here he is questioning.
No, John asks him that.
Oh, was it John?
And John says, "Is Tucson in Arizona?" And Paul's like, "Yeah, it is."
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
I checked that. I looked at the encyclopedia and I checked that.
But the lore is the fact that these sessions were miserable for them.
In a way they are, because at the beginning of the special, what they do is they book Twickenham Studios, which is a giant, like, garage-like space, a movie studio. And the thought is that they're going to rehearse here, and this is a good venue to actually have this live show that they're talking about. But the atmosphere and the sound quality is so miserable in this place. And you can tell it's probably freezing because it's January.
And they're all wearing like mohair jackets.
Yeah. And none of them look like they want to be there except for Paul. A lot of the scenes in this studio is them staring blankly at Paul as he's telling them what his ideas are for this show. Well, and you can tell none of them want to do it.
Right. And this is also where you get the riff with George, because he's like, just tell me what you want. I'm not Clapton. Yeah. And then he storms out and they're like, can we get Clapton?
Yeah.
Holy shit. We're just going to replace him.
And you could tell why George did it, because Paul is because he is like, you can tell he's a perfectionist, right? So he's constantly telling them how to play things. And you can understand this because they're his songs, right? So he wants to hear them in a certain way. But if you're George Harrison of the Beatles, you don't want to be told what to do.
You're just a monkey. Well, that's the beauty of, I mean, I hate to say it, but by them breaking up, everyone got to go off and do their own thing.
Yeah.
Ringo Starr still doing his own thing. George Harrison, the stuff that came out of him after this are some of my favorite songs ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and you get it, and I know I've seen other interviews with McCartney, and he's backtracked, and he's like, I know I was a taskmaster, I understand, but he had a vision, like you said, it was there in his head, and he just needed George to play it the way he was hearing it in his head. But as a musician, you want to play it your own way.
Yeah.
So,
why am I playing on this at all?
Yeah. So it's funny because I know, Yoko broke up the Beatles. She just sits there and does nothing. Why she's even in the studio? It never comes across. You never really see them talk about. I think there was one day where John and Yoko were not in yet, and they maybe had a discussion. But
there was a discussion about Yoko, and Paul is kind of defending her and John's choice. Like, well, that's their business.
Think about the fact that John Lennon's childhood was crap, right? His dad was like MIA.
Yeah, like he was a seaman and pretty much abandoned the family until John became famous, and then he tried to come back.
His mom died when he was a teenager, right? I will say, watching this, and you watch it with a critical eye because you know the stories about. It's a joke when someone says, "Oh, you're the Yoko of the group. You're going to break us up." She really did nothing. She was there to support him, and I'm not defending her by any means, by the way, but he seemed happy.
Yeah,
and he seemed jovial. And if that's what it took, she gave him something I guess he was missing. The one thing I really liked about this, which was weird, is that there's a lot of like goofing around with the instruments where they're just letting off steam.
What I love is to see them trading off instruments, like John playing the bass and Paul playing drums. Yeah, it's
amazing. Sometimes they just riff into this and it's like, oh yeah, by the way, that's the actual cut that they used on the album.
And being a Beatles fan, you know that's the cut because you've heard it so many times on the album. But to see them actually playing it is just such a novelty. It's so fascinating as well. And what I want to say about the actual film itself, it is so pristine and cleaned up. It brings this impossibly long ago time period like to today. This looks like it could have been filmed yesterday. Is so clean.
Dude, looks like it was filmed yesterday. Top of my notes. No one is giving Peter Jackson credit for this because this is not the way it looks on the special. This was shot in 16 millimeter.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into some technical aspects just a little bit, but they had to create special software to clean this up. First of all, it was all recorded. Give me 1 second. Okay, the video footage is all shot on 2 separate cameras without sound. The sound was recorded separately. The audio tapes recorded separately, and they recorded longer. So it actually tells you in this special that there are certain moments where you have the audio, but you don't have any visual to tie into it. And that's where he does the montage, and he'll bring in like some of the playfulness of what's going on in the studio in between. But they had to sync up the audio to the visual, which had to have been tedious for 60 hours. But then from there, they created a special software program that basically restored this footage because it was grainy, and that required sharpening the old footage, removing the grain, changing the picture speed, removing splices, and adjusting the frame rate. All of that adds to this kind of like this magical ethereal. It looks like you just want, like you're literally a fly on the wall. You are. Yeah. And that's funny because I don't remember when this quote came from, but somebody had asked Peter Jackson at some point, if you get time travel, what would it be and where would you go? And he said, I want to go back to the 60s. I'm not sure exactly what day. I'd have to think about that. I want to go to the Beatles studio and I just want to sit in the chair in the corner, not interfere, and just watch them work. That would be my magic time machine fantasy day.
And he got it.
He got it.
Talking about that time machine analogy, it really brings the Beatles into contemporary time. This film looks so good.
Yeah.
It really is like you're watching them now.
And it's heartbreaking when you realize 2 are dead. And these guys are all in their 20s, by the way, during this. And it's a painstaking, loving time capsule.
And a lot has been made of that Let It Be, and it does really kind of focus that film by itself on the lows. Like you see a lot of the arguments in there, like especially the George argument where Paul is telling him what to play, and his classic retort, I'll play whatever you want me to play, or I won't play at all. I just want to please you.
Yeah. See, I here's where I'm thinking, which is because this time in the band's life is so tied up and being tumultuous in the breakup, like it's 60 hours. You can kind of create your own narrative. Like, how many arguments did he leave on the cutting room floor?
Right.
Because outside of that George issue, and the one thing that we didn't talk about yet, which is the audio, was another thing that, again, they had to create special software for this because everything was recorded on a mono track. And knowing that they're being recorded for this documentary, sometimes they would just strum a guitar or bang the drum really loud to overshadow their discussion.
Oh, okay.
And to hide. And that's why that one scene where Paul and John go into the cafeteria.
Oh my gosh. Now,
not realizing that this guy, because by then Hogg had known that these guys were doing this, and all he's trying to do is create a documentary, and they're like trying to sabotage him at every turn.
He actually, I think it said he hit a microphone in like the floral arrangement
in the centerpiece of the table. So that's what he was forced to do. But again, they had to go out of their way. They crank up the amp full max and they just strum. And while they're talking, they're deliberately drowning out Michael's microphones. And that's what you sort of hear on the bootlegs. So what Peter Jackson's team had to do is create an artificial intelligence, a machine learning program that could learn to parse the band's monotape recordings. We digitized it, put it into a computer, teach the computer what a guitar sounds like, teach the computer what a human voice sounds like, teach them what a drum sounds like, and then they would extract each track. So these conversations that have been there, this is like Indiana Jones archive. This is like archaeology.
Again, going back to the studio atmosphere, when they first start this, this undertaking for filming this TV special and the documentary, Michael Lindsay Hogg is trying to convince them to go abroad at the beginning to do the live show that they're rehearsing for. And he's stuck on going to Africa at Libya, some outside ancient Colosseum. And Ringo is adamant. He's like, I won't go abroad. I won't go abroad. And I know the fact that part of it is because he had a weak stomach and he couldn't stomach foreign food. Because they asked him at one point, did you like India? And he's like, not really.
No, I don't like Indian food. Well, maybe you shouldn't have gone there.
Because I read something, and I don't know if this is true or not, that when he went to India, in addition to packing his clothes, he took a suitcase of Heinz baked beans because that's all he could eat.
That's all he could stomach?
That's all he could stomach.
Wow. Is that why he's making that face the entire time?
That probably is. And he actually passes gas at one point. I don't know if you caught that.
I did. Yeah. The brilliance of the countdown clock can't be stated enough, because you're really seeing, this is where it wouldn't work as a theatrical. And I think Peter Jackson's like, we would have to spend like 2 minutes per day, because, the rooftop performance is 45 minutes long. You want to retain it. That's your finale. That's what we're getting to.
Yeah. That becomes, because the director keeps complaining to them, well, if you're not going to do a live show, I don't know what I'm making anymore.
What am I making? Yeah. What am I making?
And at one point they're just throwing out ideas of where they can play. How about an orphanage? Like a kid's hospital, but not really sick kids. We don't want to depress
we
the
don't
audience.
Want to bum everybody. Right.
But just slightly sick kids.
But they were ahead of their time, because didn't somebody throw out a cruise ship?
Yes. And then George was like, the idea of a boat is insane. He's like,
not only that, being trapped. Think about that. That's a big thing right now. Like, I know Rick Springfield goes out on a cruise ship and he does like, I'm going to perform Working Dog, the entire album tonight. I'm like, imagine being on a cruise ship with all Rick Springfield fans, right? If they thought a live concert for 2 hours was going to be tedious, they would never be able to leave their room.
And that's what George says. He says, then we'd be stuck on this boat for 2 weeks with all these people. And then we'd have to get them on the boat and off the boat. And John says, well, that's not our problem. And George's like, yes, it is our problem.
Yeah, it's our problem.
For throughout the whole thing, Paul is trying to convince them. And he's like, at one point, he's like, I feel like you're all staring blankly at me when I talk.
We are.
I just want some enthusiasm. Yeah. So
he doesn't do a lot of hand wringing, but he does a lot of mustache twirling. He does a lot of cleaning of his beard. Because
he's pretty much carrying the band. He's the only one that seems to want to be there. Yeah. And he's kind of dragging them all along.
But he knows there's enough scenes of them playing together and looking happy to, as a casual fan, make me thrilled that this doesn't really play out as miserable as I think it's been made out to be.
No.
I think that Peter Jackson, with 60 hours of footage, you can kind of craft your own narrative to a certain degree and maybe negate some of the negativity that was there.
I think that it's unquestionable that they were miserable at Twickenham Studios. Yes, and I think that the film just turns on a dime when they move to their own studios in the Apple building in the basement.
I'll tell you when it turns, when Billy Preston walks in.
Yeah.
And this guy doesn't get half the credit.
And talk about people pulling songs out of the air. Like he just joins in, like he's heard these songs a million times before.
That's the brilliance of these guys, which is, Paul will start on something and then John will kick in and then Ringo will kick in. And then all of a sudden George is coming over and he's like, well, what if we do this? These songs are being made right in front of your eyes. Songs of our childhood that we've known for 50 years. It's crazy. Yeah. It really is. I mean, it's funny because when I was going through this, I put it on my wife's like, again, and I'm like, oh no, you don't have to realize this was like day one. No, this is like day 5 or whatever. I will say the minute that Yoko started singing, they knew they had to get George back. They only really show her screaming and squelching twice. But one of them is when Linda McCartney's, she wasn't McCartney at the time, daughter Heather is in there. And they cut to a look on her face, this little girl, as Yoko is just wailing like she got hit by a freight train.
But then she starts to do it herself after Yoko's done. And I think Yoko is a little bit like, is this kid making fun of me?
Yes, she's making fun of you.
And you know what else I love is when they're still at Twickenham and Lindsay Hogg goes over to Ringo to try to convince him to go to Africa to do this show. And Hogg says something to the effect, well, we need a big finale if this is going to be your last TV special. And Ringo says, well, what makes you surmise that it's going to be our last TV special? It's like everybody looking at this would surmise that this is your last.
Yeah, this is not going to end well, my friend. I can see the writing on the wall.
But yeah, as you said, when they get to the Apple Studios, it turns happy. They all want to be there. Now they're working towards something again. John keeps throwing out there, well, now it's a special about us making an album. And Paul doesn't want that. He's like, this is just another album. Then I want this to be something special. And somebody comes up with the idea. It might have been Lindsay Hogg. Well, what about the roof? And then you can see Paul light up when they're whispering that to him. Yeah, that might work.
When they finally do it, and then they do that man on the street interview, which is hysterical because these people are like so nonchalant about the fact that the freaking Beatles are on the roof. The old lady was like pissed.
The one guy is like, well, I'd like him to be down here, so we can see him.
Yeah.
But all the people that are complaining, like then there was a young man that they asked, do you like the Beatles? No. Yeah. Well, I did, but they've changed completely.
My son has a couple albums.
And all the people that are complaining, they're still there, not going anywhere. They have the idea of going up to the roof and they're still going to do some of the slower numbers in the studio and film them there doing like The Long and Winding Road, Let It Be, Two of Us, which is one of my favorite Beatles songs, Two of Us. But yeah, they decide to go to the roof. There's some hemming and hawing because they don't know if the roof is going to hold their equipment. Are they going to fall through the roof? Yeah,
that's a bit of an issue because they do haul all that shit in there.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And they start playing and they go through each number probably twice. Like I've Got a Feeling, Get Back, Dig a Pony, which is John's song. Don't Let Me Down, another John song. One After 909, all these great songs they're doing. Invariably, the police show up. These two bumbling police officers.
You know what? I did a little bit of research into this guy. So the one Bobby, his name is Ray Shaler, and he was all of 26 years old. He was quite young, and he was pretty baffled by what was going on.
You could tell he had no idea what to do, like how to address this situation.
No, because he's knocking on the door, they're answering it, but they're giving him bullshit answers.
Yeah.
They're not even really telling him what's going on. But so I read an interview with him. The man's like retired in his 70s. He's like 77 or something now. And he goes, someone asked me how I felt being the man who stopped the Beatles concert, but I wouldn't say that was true. I didn't stop the Beatles. I merely suggested it would be a good idea if they didn't carry on. Then he added, only half jokingly, now, if it had been the Rolling Stones up there on the roof. So, but yeah, these guys were like deers in the headlight. They had no idea. But once they latched onto this idea, and again, even as a casual Beatles fan, you know that rooftop concert. You don't know the story behind how they got there or why they were there, but you know it. And he had multiple cameras. I mean, that one guy was complaining because they had set up on the roof of the building across the street.
And the guy that owned the building was shows up in the Apple lobby complaining about that. Yeah. And what's great is the two cops, and it just reminded me of the bumbling guy from American Werewolf in London, the guy that knocks over the bedpans, right? So they eventually make their way to the roof. You know, after they hold them off as long as they can, the two cops make their way to the roof, and they're not doing much when they're up there either. They're just
they're just kind of standing there.
And the sergeant shows up, and he asks, "Do I have officers here?" Yes.
Yeah.
Where are they? Roof. They're on the roof. Oh, are they?
It's like really.
I can see him jamming. I can see him thinking they're probably they're lighting up a doobie with the Beatles, right?
Yeah. The one interesting I will say, which is and again, without going back and rewatching the footage now, is that it's kind of hard to know that Billy Preston was even there on the roof.
On the roof. They only show him a couple of times.
Yeah. So it's almost like he was a hidden secret.
Right.
But
right.
he added so much, like he was the spark.
And again, going back to the fly on the wall aspect, like after the first day he plays with them, and like the next morning he's not there yet, and they're having a discussion about him, and George is like, well, we're going to have to pay him if he's going to play with us. We're going to have to give him session musician rates. And then John is like, I think you should stay all the time. Fifth Beatle, Billy Preston. And you could see Paul hem and haw. He's like, no. It's, he's trying to keep this precious, right? So he's like, four of us is tough enough. I don't know about five.
Yeah, but I you saw no personality disorders out of Preston.
No, like absolutely not. He's just happy to be there.
He was thrilled to be there, and he was such a contribution.
Yeah.
Now, maybe 3, studio albums later, he's like, all right, enough of this crap. I can't deal with you guys.
Because this is the only Beatles album he played on. He did carry on with George Harrison, especially once he became solo. But yeah, this was the only Beatles album that Preston played on.
Okay. Can I ask why they had an anvil in the studio?
That was because of Maxwell's Silver Hammer, like bang, bang, Maxwell's, because they came up with that song during these sessions, but didn't actually record it for an album until Abbey Road.
Oh, why was I thinking that was, you know why? I'm thinking that was Sgt. Pepper, but that's because it's in the Sgt. Pepper movie.
Yeah, it's in the Sgt. Pepper movie.
Okay. See, again, this is
another big reason why I loved the Beatles as a kid was that stupid Sgt. Pepper movie that they used to show on HBO.
There is a point where we're going to have to review that. Listen, if we could review Xanadu,
we can review Sgt. Pepper. Yeah,
absolutely.
But speaking of that anvil, I just want to give a shout out to poor Mal Evans, who is their roadie / butler.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
He's the one running out to get their ciggies. He's the one that is actually tuning the guitars.
And a lot of drinking going on.
Yeah.
How they maintain their voice while they were all constantly smoking blows my mind.
Yeah.
Even to this day, Paul McCartney still got a damn voice.
So and he sounds good to this day.
I know. I want to go back and rewatch this because I really was just absolutely enthralled. And there's one particular scene, and I want to say it was when they were playing "On Our Way Home," which is one of my favorite.
That's Two of Us. That's the name of the song.
Okay.
Yeah.
The two. Okay. And it's just they start to jam. And Paul and John literally, I got goosebumps right now, literally getting each other's face. And the puppy dog eyes on Paul McCartney as he's looking at John and they're playing together, to me, says it all about this relationship between these two guys.
I think the song was written for Linda, but when they're singing it together, it is like it's about them.
Each other. Yes. And it's, I think going back to that conversation that they thought was hidden, when they're trying to deal with George and they both realize they're wrong. They both have chips on their shoulder. Their egos are controlling who and what they are to the point where it's detrimental to sometimes people around them.
Yeah.
But they blamed each other, but then they both blamed themselves, So this is the kind of relationship that few of us have in our life, where we have somebody that we can be that honest and show our faults, know what my faults are, but you still love me. You asked me before, what my relationship is to the Beatles. And again, I know who they were. I know the albums, my uncle had the albums. I listened to them, probably recorded them on the cassette at some point. CDs, White Album is probably one of my favorites, by the way. But when John Lennon was killed, I remember getting the 45 for Christmas that year in my stocking. What was the first album? That was the first song that was released off that album. Double Indemnity, double Fantasy.
Double Fantasy. So that would have been either Watching the Wheels, Woman, Starting Over, just like Starting Over.
Starting Over. Yeah, with him and Yoko on the cover. Mm-hmm. The little 45, which they don't make anymore. Kids, little tiny LPs for anyone out there who doesn't know what a 45 is.
And not only did a 45 is a little tiny record, you actually had to get a plastic piece to hold it in place.
Little tiny things, which
on your turntable. Yeah.
But it's funny, and I know this is going to be absolutely blasphemous for you, but I do prefer my McCartney with a little bit more wings attached to it.
Hey, there's nothing wrong to me with wings. There's nothing wrong with wings.
As a child of the 80s, I do latch on more so to the stuff of my early youth, which were the 70s. And Paul McCartney and Wings, I love those goofy songs. I love and again, like, this guy just had so much coming out of him that even this breakup and these four guys going their separate way wasn't enough for him to be like, you know what, I'm done. I'm just going to keep making it. Look at how many friggin' solo songs he came up even after Wings broke up.
Again, I said that my father had the Sgt. Pepper album, and that thing I could just disappear into. Reading the lyrics, it was I had the whole story worked out in my head, even though I learned later that this was not a concept album per se, other than the whole Sgt. Pepper idea of the band. But just like anything else, you take your own feelings and you interpret it your own way. So, and he also had the red and the blue greatest hits albums.
Yes, those are the two that my uncle had that I know for a fact that
those were gatefold cover. You could open it up and there was a picture on the inside of the Beatles with a bunch of just like civilians, bystanders hidden among them. So I would always look at it and find Ringo, find George, find John, find Paul. I would I knew. But what was funny is that my dad's albums had candle wax on them, and I always wonder, why does he have candle wax? Something was going on there. But not only was it the albums, but because I knew those songs, whenever Yellow Submarine would come on TV, I would watch it. And that's how I knew their personalities, was from that cartoon, watching Yellow Submarine. And that's, I knew what they were like just from, even though that's probably not an accurate representation.
No, I'm sure that,
But watching this, you get a feeling for what their individual personalities are like. Yeah. You can't help but not after 8 hours of sitting with them.
Yeah, no. And like I said, Ringo seems to be kind of the glue. Like, he just sits back.
Yeah, because Linda at one point says, obviously Paul would be her favorite. But Linda says, is talking about Ringo. Yeah, I'm the most relaxed around him. And the implication is that she's not relaxed around George or John because, even as a viewer, they could be difficult to access. But Ringo is kind of like the everyman. He's just there. He's hanging out.
Yeah. You need me to step in. You need me to hit a riff. I'm there. Boom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It really is something to kind of see. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.
It was fascinating. And I wouldn't say that it's inaccessible to somebody that's
not at all. Like I said, I'm a casual fan. If you don't like the Beatles, if you're someone who's like, commercial bull crap, it's like, then don't watch it.
And what's fascinating to me more than anything, Jackson went out of his way to not use footage that was already in Let It Be. So if you watch Let It Be,
that was my other question, was how much of this it was just regurgitated from
like
the
he meant this
actual-
to be a supplement to Let It Be and not something
So
that repeated it.
It's a documentary on the making of the documentary.
Yes. So if
basically.
you watched Let It Be, you'd be watching something completely different than this.
I did read that they're in talks, or that he wants to go back and remaster that as well.
Yeah, I've got a bootleg of it, but it's such bad quality that it's
That's what
for me to
it
watch.
sounds like. That now, was that released in theaters?
Yes, in 1970 it was released, and I think at the dawn of VHS and beta they had it available.
Those are probably
I'm sure. And that's what my bootleg DVD is a rip off of the old videotape.
Bootleg of the VHS. His love for this band, you can see it through and through, because this is a labor of love. You know, like I said, we're sitting through 8 hours. The man sat there. You have to clean this all up first, judiciously decide what to keep and what to cut.
And I have to say that green is a big color for them. First of all, it's all over the Apple Studios, you know, and that's what's a green apple. A green apple is what's on their record labels.
But the backside is the cut apple, right?
No, the backside is the cut apple. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
There you go. But yeah, it's a Granny Smith, by the way. Isn't it? Granny Smith?
I believe so.
Green apple? Yeah.
I believe so.
I don't know.
Christina will tell us if we're wrong. They mention the name Alan Klein a few times, and he is actually more the catalyst to their breakup than anybody else. You know, as anybody knows out there, the Beatles had big disagreements over Alan Klein. John, George, and Ringo were sold on him as their new manager, and Paul refused to sign with him. So that is the catalyst in the months after this documentary as to what actually broke them up. And
so this was 69 and they broke up in 70.
No, this was January 69. They officially broke up internally in September of 69. It was not publicly announced until April of 1970. So the world thought they were still together for 5 months or whatever.
But didn't all this stuff accumulate into 2 albums?
So they did this. They released Get Back and Don't Let Me Down as a single, like immediately. And you can see them in the documentary saying, we should put this out as a single like right now. And they did do that. But then they shelved it because they couldn't decide on whether it was good or not. So they went to make Abbey Road in the meantime. Abbey Road came out to great acclaim. They broke up internally. And then finally they got Phil Spector in to clean up the tapes and put out his version of Let It Be, which Paul hated. So, and that was another reason. There was acrimony between them.
Creative control.
Yeah, and the fact that Phil Spector put orchestras on Let It Be and The Long and Winding Road, which was against the grain of what they were trying to do in the first place. Just get a true live sound.
Wow.
Big fights.
There's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
You know, you can take it on the surface, or
it's a long sordid tale. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Wow.
Look, go if you want some follow-up, go look at that Beatles anthology special. That is fabulous, and that tells the whole story.
Oh, they
remember that? Do you remember that?
Right? Yeah. When was that?
That was in '96. That was when George was still alive. So the three of them got together, did that song "Free as a Bird" with John Lennon's vocals.
There you go. Released it. Yep.
So yeah, if you can get your hands on that, if it's streaming anywhere, look at the Beatles anthology. That'll tell you the entire story, beginning to end.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. There you go. Wow. It's bucket proof.
Bucket proof. This is. I couldn't be happier with this myself as a Beatles fan. I couldn't be happy. So let's move from the Beatles to what some consider the antithesis of the Beatles.
Well, listen, if it wasn't for the Beatles, we wouldn't have the Monkees.
We wouldn't have the Monkees. You can't take the Beatles out of the Monkees, but I think in some respects, you can't take the Monkees out of the Beatles either. I'm saying that with a whisper because I know people are hissing at me, but I'll explain myself.
I mean, I hate to say that, but there are, one of those montages was straight up Monkee-esque.
Yeah.
In their antics in the studio.
So let's take a break and let's come back and we'll talk about
some Granny Smith apples.
It's intermission time. Time to pause and refresh at the snack bar. During this short break, you can treat your taste of good food and sparkling cold beverages, including delicious Coca-Cola. If you're hot dog hungry, we have them. Sizzling, juicy hot dogs served in warm, oven-fresh buns, plus a complete menu of all your favorites. Visit the Refreshment Center now.
Enjoy delicious food and ice-cold Coca-Cola.
All right, we're back and we're talking Monkees. Now, again, I want to preface this conversation about this movie. I want to talk about our relationship with this band. And band is a term that can be used loosely here, because the Monkees, as we all know, is an entity that was created for a TV show. There were auditions held. It wasn't like this was a natural forming band or that even these people were friends beforehand. They just kind of met after the audition process. Producers put them together. They had chemistry and they went off to do this TV show for 2 years. And in the process, they had to tour. And in order to tour, they had to play their own instruments. Now, Michael Nesmith and Peter Tork were already accomplished musicians.
Mm-hmm.
Davy Jones, he was the Artful Dodger in Oliver.
Okay.
So he had musical background. What he could play, I don't know, but he played a mean tambourine, I'll tell you
Tambourine. That was good.
And Mickey Dolenz could play guitar, but somebody had to be the drummer. And everybody else said, no way, I'm not doing that. So Mickey got the job and he learned how to play the drums. And they went on tour as a functioning band. So they became a band, and you actually see them play live in this movie, in Head. So
I missed them by a week. I know that you've seen them live.
I've seen them live several times together and individually as well.
Yeah. One of the last times I was at Disney, there's a little amphitheater in Epcot, I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah. And they had played the week before. I got Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Oh,
yeah.
Otherwise, what a letdown.
And I have an aunt who loves the Monkees and she has seen them numerous times. But you make this sound like this is like one and done kind of a manufactured band. What are all these K-pops? What is, Menudo was manufactured.
Yeah, it's the same
Backstreet
thing.
Boys,
Although
every one of these boys bands now, in sync, these it's a corporate build.
Yeah, although that's kind of par for the course today. Today you're so used to seeing this, but then this was kind of, yes, it was taking advantage of the Beatles. And this is obviously based on Hard Day's Night and Help version of the Beatles, the playful, what the public knew, the manic, happy-go-lucky, smiling Beatles. And they wanted that for a TV show. And they definitely got it. Now, the first time I remember seeing the Monkees, it was way, way back, because they've played the TV show on and off in syndication ever since it went off the air in the 60s, right?
What was it, two seasons?
2 seasons, 2 years worth of shows. But I remember back in 1980, I was on a family vacation. We had rented a house in Cape Cod. And whenever I'd go on vacation, whether it be in a hotel or what have you, it was like watching TV in another country, like in another state. But you're just in another state.
Their seven's not my seven.
Their channels, their ABC is on channel 4.
This is crazy.
So every day before we went to the beach, of course, I'd turn on the TV as my parents decided what they were going to do for the day. Yep. And in Cape Cod, in the local station, they aired the Monkees, which they did not air at the time in New York, where home was. So as I was watching this every day, because we were there for about a week, so I watched 5 episodes. It kind of dawned on me, and I was only 9 years old then, that I've seen this before. Like as a little kid, probably that's when they showed it in New York and syndicated stations. And it was like when I was a kid, I was accessing my even smaller child memories back then. So I was fascinated by this show. And then we went back home and I forgot about it for years. And then suddenly, fast forward 6 years later, MTV in 1986 decides to program a day's worth of nothing but Monkees episodes. Why or how they came up with this idea, I don't know, but they called it Pleasant Valley Sunday.
Hey.
And, just like anybody else, I watched MTV on a regular basis then. So I tuned in, and I don't think I knew what they were doing. Tuned it in, and suddenly the Monkees is on. And again, as a 15-year-old, I access the memories from my 9-year-old self. Like, I remember this from Cape Cod.
You're like one of those little Russian nesting dolls.
And I sat there and I watched from that point on, I sat there and watched everything that MTV showed. And I was in love with this band. And I went back because Rhino Records had the rights to their catalog. And they had put out all their albums again on vinyl at the time. It wasn't even on CD yet. I bought all the reprints of these records on vinyl, and I became a Monkees fanatic. And I was a Monkees fanatic before I was a Beatles fanatic. Even though I loved the Beatles, I didn't have all the albums. I had Sgt. Pepper, and I had the greatest hits. Yeah. The Monkees, though, actually opened the door for the Beatles to me, because once I became obsessed with a TV show, then I looked at A Hard Day's Night. Then I looked at Help, which I hadn't seen before. So yeah, the Monkees actually are very important in my musical upbringing from that time. And I still love them to this day.
There you go. Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I remember watching them at a really early age, you know, but then again, it's almost like I see these, you know, between this and Scooby-Doo. I mean, they were the advent of the MTV generation.
Oh yeah, that's
every episode had a chase scene with a musical number.
I'm sure that's why MTV recognized that, and that's why they played it that day and made them famous again.
Yeah, I Best of the Monkees is the only album by them I've ever owned.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I could recommend some, especially starting with this soundtrack.
It waited quite some time before I ever even knew, you know, like some of their other songs, like Valerie and some of this, and then it's like, it's not on my best of album, so I don't know it.
Right.
And you know, you mentioned MTV. They tried to hilarious failure to reboot these with the new Monkees TV show. And I only remember that because one of the actors' name, I think, was Jared Chandler, but they had an open casting call. I remember this, an open casting call for the new Monkees. And I think I was working in Manhattan at the time. And it was probably ran in syndication. Was it on MTV, or was it just?
I think it was on syndication. I think it was in syndication,
but it did not. You can't recapture this.
And they all had mullets, as what I seem to remember, or at least the Davy Jones equivalent guy had a mullet. It was
you're now talking to the '80s generation. You're not talking to the '60s. So,
yeah, but that's why they were so popular in the '80s, is because I think our generation of the '80s was looking back to that, like, that stuff is pretty good, you know?
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's light. It's poppy. You know, unfortunately, we talked last week about the death of Michael Nesmith, and I will say that I have never seen an outpour for a celebrity on social media like I have seen for Michael Nesmith in the last week. You know, I follow a lot of, bands, their official Facebook pages and whatnot, and musicians. And this guy, say what you will, that they were just a goofy, manufactured TV show to capitalize on the Beatles, but they did leave an impression. I mean, Davy Jones is showing up on the Brady Bunch. Mickey Dolenz is still going, man.
Yeah, Michael Nesmith, a really talented songwriter. And he wrote many songs for the Monkees. There's lots of songs that appear on their albums.
Some of my favorite songs are the ones that he did lead vocals on.
Yeah. Different Drum was him, and the producers turned it down. It's a breakup song. It's not a Monkees song.
Yeah.
And he gave it to Linda Ronstadt.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, they've spent the last 40 years of their life proving that they are legitimate, musicians. They actually cut an album. This was a couple years ago now, called Just Us. It was because Just Us.
And they did one in because this is going to figure into this discussion about this movie. But the first two Monkees album, Monkees and More of the Monkees, was them on vocals only, and then Michael Nesmith on guitar a few times with session musicians. And so they were so ground down by critics and their peers that they fought for their third album to be just them, and that's called Headquarters. And so from that point on, once they made Headquarters, it didn't really alleviate any of the criticism against them, because they were just seen as pariahs back then, as insincere corporate pariahs. That from that point on, they kind of blended themselves playing on albums with studio musicians, but it was under their control rather than like the producers on high. And unfortunately, it caused diminishing returns, because from that point on, their sales kind of went down until they faded out, unfortunately.
But they have a lasting legacy. And you talk about the studio controlling this stuff. Neil Diamond, that's where he got to start writing.
I'm a Believer.
I'm
was
a
their biggest
Believer.
hit. The TV show lasted 2 seasons. So it started in September of 1966, weeks after the Beatles played their last live show. The Beatles played their last live show in San Francisco in August 66. The Monkees premiered in September of 66.
Huh. Jumping on that, huh?
Yeah. So it's like, you know, the
fill
old
that gap.
The old guard is out, the new guard is coming in the pop landscape here. And of course, the Beatles went on to do much bigger and better things. But the Monkees were on for 2 seasons. The second season ended in March of 68, I believe. And unfortunately, NBC at the time chose not to continue with the show. Now, they were still, you know, the number one recording group in the country when the show was canceled. But apparently, and this is how the story goes, that NBC wanted the show to continue exactly as it was, like, you know, a third season of exactly what they'd been doing for the first 2 seasons. The Monkees themselves wanted like a laugh-in type variety show with musical guests and sketches and vignettes, which I think would have been
interesting,
fabulous, right?
Yeah,
it would have been great.
You think about the advent of the variety show, you know, during that timeline. I mean, how many variety shows came? Everyone had a variety show. They
felt they had done the show as it was to death, and that they couldn't really take it any other places.
Yeah, back then it was a full 24 episodes per season. No, it was just prime time. This was prime time.
This was prime time on NBC.
Okay, I know, you know, 66 was a year before I was even born, but you know, we only know them through syndication.
Yeah.
You know.
And if you're familiar with a Monkey show, like throughout the series, they do parodies of other shows that were current then, like Batman or I Dream of Jeannie and stuff like that. That was also
Batman,
on TV.
Batman was a parody already.
Yeah. So yes, the NBC rejected their idea for a variety show. So the Monkey series ended, unfortunately. And because they were still on top of the world when the show was canceled, they didn't feel that they were in any danger of slipping or losing their position. So that's when the idea for a feature film came into play, you know, because they were still under contract with Columbia, and it was meant to be the first in a series of movies. So they were going to transition that in their heads from the TV screen to the big screen. And this movie Head was going to be the first shot in that attempt. And so now they had met the same producers of the TV show. Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider were the producers of the Monkees TV show. And hence they became the producers of the Monkees' first film, Head. And Jack Nicholson got involved as well.
Yeah, this is interesting that Nicholson is, and he's got a little cameo in there, right?
He does.
Co-writer.
Yeah, he's co-writer
of this thing.
So what they did was they went to a resort in California called Ojai. And at this resort, they brainstormed. They had some substances, apparently. And they would sit around. They would sit around a tape recorder and they just brainstormed ideas like vignettes, much in probably the same way.
Were.
Yeah, maybe much in the same way that they were thinking about doing a third season of their TV show. So they were brainstorming these little, you know, bits and pieces. And Nicholson took the tapes away from their, you know, weekend getaway, and he wrote a screenplay out of it. And that screenplay became Head.
If you want to call this a screenplay.
So now I watched, because my son is, you know, I've made him watch the Monkees TV show.
Yep.
So he's familiar with them. He came with me to see Mickey and Mike in 2019 before the pandemic hit. So, you know, so he's steeped in the Monkees as well. And he's never seen this movie before. And as we were watching it unspool, and I have the Blu-ray, the new box set Blu-ray. I had the 5.1 going. It was cleaned up. It was pristine.
Wow.
But up until the point where the audience comes on stage and rips them apart and they're mannequins.
Mannequins, yeah.
And he was like, he looked at me and he's like, "What is this movie about? What am I watching?"
Yeah, there's no narrative.
So I'm like, but there is a narrative. If you really think about it, there's several narratives going on. There's several possibilities of what this could be about. And there's one that I feel very strongly about that we'll share. But that's really what this is. It seems to be like a bunch of unrelated scenes, non sequiturs, little sketches and vignettes tied together.
Well, there's definitely a commentary going on.
Yeah.
to what the world they're living in at that point.
There's several references to them being pariahs. Like there's the whole thing is built around
and manufactured bands.
Yeah, they even sing themselves. There's a song called the Diddy Diego War Chant where, hey, we are the Monkees. You know, we love to please, a manufactured image.
Yep.
With no philosophies. They're making fun of themselves, and it's a comment on how the rest of the world sees them.
It gets dark really quick, but as a parent who let my kids watch this when it was on TV and then be like, oh, they made a movie, let's go. And, the opening 5 minutes, all four of them are tongue kissing this chick, one after the other. And I'm like, I would be squirming in my seats if my 9-year-old.
I was a little bit, but the funny thing is that, of course, when she gets to Davy, all suddenly the windows open and the music swells and the birds come flying in.
But he went in full open mouth on that. He was Davey was like all in. He's like, dude, you got your brother.
They all were though.
Going on.
They all, there. I know.
Yeah, it's within seconds. It's far sexier than anything they've ever done on the television.
Now, fun fact, that was Jack Nicholson's girlfriend at the time. Oh,
really?
Yes. So he's sitting there watching this.
He's like, yes.
With that big, I'm sure with his Nicholson eyebrows raised and the big smile on his face.
I mean, this whole thing is meta.
But even before that, we get a suicide at the beginning.
Yeah, there's some serious, there's a lot of culturally insensitive things going on here that would not fly in the 2020s.
So at the beginning there's a bridge dedication. Yeah. The mayor of whatever town that they're in. Gentlemen. Yep. So suddenly he's about to cut the ribbon on the bridge, but Mickey runs through it like he's a marathon runner winning the marathon. And his three fellow monkeys are chasing him. And the reason they're chasing him is he's running to throw himself off the bridge.
I thought they were all running from the.
Well, no, that comes in at the end. They're not actually
full circle, but
they're not full circle. They're not being chased by everybody else at the beginning.
So you have to go back and watch the beginning
because only Mickey jumps at the beginning. The other three do not jump.
They cut.
So Mickey falls in.
Does he jump or they just throw a mannequin over the side?
Yeah, we could surmise that. We could surmise, as Ringo would say. But mermaids save him and throw him back up to the surface.
Madison was mixed in there. I saw it.
And this goes into that makeout scene, and then from there it goes into a war scene. Well, you see that footage of the assassination. Yeah. That's tough for a parent to watch with their kid.
But that's interesting because, like you said, before they get to that, it goes to all these multiple television screens with all of this noise that's going on in the world.
But no, if you watch
a lot of them are the scenes from the vignette
later in the movie. So you're seeing the entire movie play out in those television screens.
But you got Arabs. There's a scene where there's German soldiers and then there's Indians. Yeah. So, but that's what television was back then.
Exactly. That's the point of the movie.
F Troop. It was, you got headhunters, you had sheiks going on. Yeah. I mean, that's what populated the landscape of the television.
Yeah. Because they're going through different genres of TV shows, basically. So you see them in a war vignette. Now it's obviously a comment on the Vietnam War because you see a quarterback in one of the foxholes who's acting like he's he's playing a game.
Peter's really taking those hits.
Yeah, the guy keeps knocking him over, and Peter's really and he was upset.
And that's it because that's Mickey. They're in the trenches in the foxholes, and Mickey refuses to put his helmet on. So Peter goes to get him another helmet. He goes, "You're gonna get shot in the head, don't you know?" And then Mickey dies. God, right?
No, he pretends like he dies, and he gets up and brushes himself off.
He pretends, but still, it's very disconcerting.
Yep. And then they charge this cave, and when they go in the cave, suddenly they're running from backstage so it's almost like they're heading out to war, and their war is playing live in front of screaming teenage girls.
Yeah.
So it all kind of fits in. So I take it
back. There is a narrative in the sense that it's commentary on not only themselves but on the world that they're now finding themselves in, and all of us in the 60s, the late 60s, which you look back and you're like, how did anyone survive this? Because it is chaos. But 20 years from now, people will look back at us and be like, how did these people survive this thing? Because it just seems nuts. But there's that little snippet where you're just getting the television channels changing.
Yes, and that's throughout. That's a theme throughout.
But
well.
it like I had flashbacks because when my father first had a VCR tape, like, and you could record, that's what I would do. I would actually change the channel, sit in front of the TV and change channels and just randomly record like 2 or 3 seconds. I remember the giant ants, you know, just, you know, and just create like these video montages of what was going on that. I wish I still had that.
It was literally a clicker. You would have the big button that you would press down and it would make a click sound.
I don't even think my dad had that at the time. I think I still had to actually change the knob.
Oh, okay.
So, but yeah, and we go into the diner scene.
We go into the diner scene where like the rest of the dine. Well, first we get into that Western scene.
Oh yes, the Western.
Mickey where Terry Garr is the girl.
The guest list on this thing is all over the place,
and he's kicking her after she gets bitten by a snake and she like dies. He's kicking her, get up, lady. We know this isn't real. And then like the fake arrows hit him in the chest. They walk through the set and suddenly they're on the back lot, and all the other people on the back lot are avoiding them. Oh, here they come, these disgusting kids. Then you go into Davey in the boxing match, which is hilarious because it's Annette Funicello was in that scene.
Yeah, it is a hit list of people who just show up randomly in this thing.
Frank Zappa is in it at one point.
Zappa's in it. Obviously, like I said, Nicholson has a little cameo. Isn't Peter Fonda also in that scene?
Dennis Hopper is in that scene.
Dennis Hopper, I'm sorry. But Sonny Liston is who he's fighting.
Suddenly it cuts to him like, you know, with black, in total Sylvester Stallone, like black eyes and blood coming out of in the boxing ring. And then Mickey comes in and knocks everybody out.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Tells them to stay down. And then you have the scene with Mickey in the desert blowing up the Coke machine. And
that was I'm sure Coke was not happy with that.
No, they were not happy about it. They tried to get an injunction, but the movie was just such a failure that suddenly they realized it wasn't a big deal.
But that is a huge statement on commercialism and product placement that we see.
And before he blows up the Coke machine, you see that entire Italian army just surrenders to him because he's an American with no weapon.
Yeah, like I said, there's some really culturally insensitive portrayals of these.
But again, you say it because these are stereotypes that we're seeing on television. And I think that's the point here. They were moving through at various points. They're trapped in a black box. They keep ending up trapped in this box, which represents television. Literally, they're trapped in the television.
You are making this so much better.
Yeah.
I gave it credit for it.
And that's why they're being chased at the end, is because they're trying to get them back in the box. Yeah. They're trying to get them back into their safe zone. That's where we want it. That's where we need you.
They
you
even
can't
ended
be
up
outside
in a dandruff commercial, and they're the dandruff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the guest stars in this movie is Victor Mature, who is like an old timey Hollywood actor, right? He's the guy's head that they're in when they're playing dandruff. Their record company was RCA Victor. So his character, Victor Mature, is the big Victor. So that's why he's a giant at the end. So
I thought that was Jack LaLanne.
No, Victor Mature. So
wow. Okay. Wow.
So that's so he represents the RCA Corporation that's trying to stomp them into oblivion. So there's so much going on here.
There is listen, any movie that can make Mylar balloons freaky is it's like,
that was a comment on an Andy Warhol movie because he had done the same thing. So
why was the cop was having a dream about Mike's birthday? It was like, it really was.
I can't explain that. That's something.
But there's a scene where they're laughing at cripples, and I'm like, what's this about? The suicidal teeny bot. Oh yeah, there is a lot. I will say this. We talk about Michael Nesmith, not a wool cap in sight, and good on you, man.
Yes.
He broke out of his trademark when he passed away. This is the first thing they say: the wool cap, wool, and
He let go of the wool cap, I think, halfway through the second season.
Okay.
And then obviously it's not here. But like I was saying last week, we were mentioning what we were going to do this week. In the pilot episode of the series, his name was Wool Hat. Wasn't even Mike. It was Wool Hat.
Hey, I wonder why these guys felt they had to defend themselves for the last 40 years. Yeah. It's like, I'm a man, I'm a person. I have a name.
This goes through all these various scenes. And my son Harrison, he loved the scene in the boxing ring when Mickey comes up and punches everybody out. He thought that was hilarious.
That was funny. That was good. Yeah.
He loved the Coke thing because he loves Coke. Yeah. He's a kid. He loves Coke
and explosions.
He loved once Davey gets nuts because at one point, Peter sits down when they're trapped in the black box and he tries to get very philosophical and he lights a candle and he's telling them why he thinks that they're in the black box. And at the end of it, he goes, but why should I speak? Because I know nothing. Yeah. And then Davy goes nuts. You know nothing? He's like, we've been sitting here listening to this. To you? And then he breaks out of the box and he's punching everybody. And then my son thought that was the funniest thing. But
that is true. I will say, you said you had the Blu-ray. Unfortunately, my DVD came from the library. And when Davy's going for a stroll on the beach, my disc just went wonky.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, here we go.
Were you able to watch it on YouTube or something?
No, I'm hoping I didn't miss too much. But it did skip ahead. I had to clean it and jump through. But when they get sucked into the vacuum cleaner, like these giant props are flying around.
Yeah.
So filming this, I think they must have had a blast.
Oh, absolutely.
Because again, one day you're in cavalry garb, and now you're out in the desert, and now you're in a concert, and you're being torn apart as mannequins, which is very disconcerting.
Yes, it is. It is.
But that is as close as you get to like Beatlemania, where you see these, the fervor that,
because literally
there's a reason the Beatles stopped touring, because of people like that.
Because that scene, literally they become a fabricated band. They are not real.
Right. Yeah. No, it's you have now talked this up. I think that the little factory tour was a little prescient, because I'm pretty sure that was an Amazon warehouse. So
that's very Wonka-esque to me, that factory tour.
Yeah. In the diner scene, I just kept going back to, because I'm like, 75 cents for a roast beef sandwich. I want to go back to those days.
Peter's got the ice cream cone in his hand. Why do you have the ice cream cone? Well, I don't want to eat it. Well, just throw it out. I can't. They're starving children. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The scene in the bathroom where you keep seeing the giant eye, but Peter walks in whistling Strawberry Fields.
Yes, he does.
So that's a little.
So if there's only one carry through between these two features, it is Strawberry Fields Forever. I don't think that they probably even bothered to get the rights to that.
Yeah.
Oh, I got one for you, actually, that we didn't talk about yet. When Davy has his big dance number.
Go ahead. Yes, I do know that.
It's Tony Basil from Mickey.
She was like, what, 12?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how old she was during her Mickey fame.
Yeah, but that came out in what, 82?
But she was the choreographer, so she choreographed that whole dance routine.
Oh, I thought she was the girl dancing with him.
She was. She choreographed it, and she was in the movie.
And apparently, the song "Mickey" is about Mickey Dolenz.
I don't know.
That
would blow my mind.
Which has been rumored.
He's so fine. He blows her mind.
Hey, Mickey. Although the internet rumors are that it deals with something else, but we're not going to.
But there's so many great lines in this. Like when Davy finishes his number and he comes out and he runs into Frank Zappa. That song was pretty white. Well, so am I.
Well, so am I. What do you want from me? I'm a white guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little on the nose there. But we talked about Jack Nicholson, that he co-wrote this. And I guess he actually compiled the soundtrack with snippets of
the soundtrack is an experience in itself, because like you said, the songs from the movie are on the soundtrack, but he's clipping dialogue from the movie so that it makes sense. It speaks to the songs.
Who knew that Jack Nicholson was this ahead of his time?
I know.
His quote though was, "I saw it like 158 million times, man. I loved it." And I'm like, well, you wrote it, so
yeah.
Of course you're gonna say you loved it. I did see that Pauline Kael, who was a film critic for the New Yorker, she reviewed half of it because she walked out. And I'm like, what? You took a page right out of Janet Maslin's playbook there.
How can you? That's your job to review movies. I can't walk out during the middle of my workday and just not go back.
Well, not only that, it's like, well, I'm going to review half a song.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't even make it to the chorus, so I can't tell you. I guess it's okay.
So I'm glad that maybe this conversation might, have you glean some more insight into the movie, because at the very end, as you said, it's very circular. So it comes back to that same bridge at the end. But by this time, all the denizens of all the TV sets and all the characters that they've come across are chasing them, trying to get them back. They all jump from the bridge at the end to commit suicide. They all fall into the water, and it seems that they're free. They're swimming away, but they're not. They come up against a glass wall in the water, And you see that they're back in the box. It's like a big fish tank, and it's Victor Mature, like RCA Victor, carting them away on the back of a flatbed truck in this like box aquarium. So they can never be free. They'll always be stuck in the TV. They're always stuck in the box. Yeah.
That they literally are trapped.
Yeah.
As much as we could, we made it onto the silver screen, but we're still trapped in this box because this is what people will always know us for.
Yeah.
I am very, very sad that I never got to see these guys in concert.
I saw Davey solo, Mickey solo, Peter solo, and then the three of them together as the Monkees, and then a little bit later, Peter, Mickey, and Mike on their tour. And then Peter passed, and it was just Mickey and Mike, and I saw them once together as well.
Yeah, it's all right. I can probably say I never even knew this existed until we started this podcast, and you
really
talked about it
really
times. It just wasn't one of those things that was on my radar. I mean, I knew the Monkees, I knew who the Monkees were, I know their songs, watched the show numerous times, loved their antics, might have had their lunchbox.
Oh really?
I'm thinking it sure wasn't the Partridge Family, that's for sure.
Now with Mike's passing, I did catch an article where he's talking a little bit about Head. And he says in this older interview that it was the high point of his whole Monkees experience was making this movie.
Sure, because you're rallying against the machine.
Yeah.
You are taking every gripe and slight that's been thrown at you, and you're throwing it back at them.
Now, what they did not want to do was make a 90-minute version of their TV show. And I think that they were successful.
They succeeded.
Yeah.
They succeeded in that. What they did make,
yeah,
it is a sight to behold. That is
now unfortunately it cost $750,000 to make. It made $16,000 at the box office. It was a major failure. Now here's the thing, is that it was not released until December of 1968. By this time the TV show had been off the air. I think the reruns ran until August of 68. So they were out of the public eye in America, at least, because I think they did a Far East tour, but they were out of the public eye for like 4 months. Columbia was nervous because they didn't think that anybody would want to see a movie with the Monkees in it, especially like an avant-garde movie like this. So the ad campaign that they ran on TV was just some guy staring at the camera, somebody's head literally staring at the camera.
I want to ask you about that. And he does show up, I think, in some of the little montages.
In the movie, yeah, he shows up. But they were afraid of revealing that this was a Monkees movie. So they got nobody to see it. Because anybody...
This is avant-garde to the existential end of it.
So the kids that loved the Monkees, and people are very fickle. And that 4 months could have been just enough time for everybody to move on to the next guy, Bobby Sherman, or whoever it was. So, but the kids, it wasn't marketed as a Monkees movie. So the kids didn't know to go see it. And nobody that was like an aficionado of film would have wanted to see a movie with the Monkees in it. So they got nobody. Nobody went to see it.
Why did they never make an animated show of these guys? The stuff that they just did in this movie, you could have done on such a better level in an animated series. When you think of all the crap, listen, Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days had their own cartoons at one point.
Fun fact, well, not so fun, but on the first day of shooting, Davy Jones, Mickey Dolenz, and Mike Nesmith walked out because they learned that they were not going to get any screenwriting credit, because it was their ideas that they were brainstorming that Jack Nicholson took away, that it was going to be Nicholson that got the sole screenwriting credit on this,
even though they're the ones who came up with all the ideas while they were high.
And that
I heard they went to George Harrison's house.
They were hoping to co-direct the movie, and that they learned that wasn't going to happen. So they walked. Peter Tork was the only one they were able to film because he didn't walk with the rest of them.
Wow.
So what they did was they coaxed them back with a larger percentage of the gross, which was nothing because nobody went to see it.
Oh, that's like empty calories right there. It's like, no, come back. We'll give you back end credit. Really?
So what would have been, so here's my ideal situation. What if we could turn back time, if NBC had greenlit a season 3 of a laugh-in type monkey show, it would have been on the air while Head was being released. They would have been able to advertise it during their TV show, much like they did their songs.
But if the third season turned out to be like this, like, why would I pay money to go to the theater to see what they're now doing?
Well, say if it's like
free?
Say if like Laugh-In, it had like a live audience, right? And it was more like, you know, like funny Artie Johnson type sketches that wouldn't be like this at all.
Oh dear.
And like live guests coming in. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. If Paul Lynde can get his own special.
And interestingly enough, this was one of the first movies advertised with the new MPAA ratings at the time. And it was given a G rating, even though all this stuff was in it. It was given a G rating.
Well, just the name alone is enough for a PG. I did read that the only reason they named it this is that if they ever made a sequel, they could successfully write from the people who gave you head. Yeah, if they made a sequel, maybe it would have been torso, and then maybe the third movie would have been foot. Yeah, it's heady. It is heady.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
You know, I get it on that level, and especially, you know, now that you've kind of like laid this out for me like a moron, explained it to me, because
it's not obvious, you know, and you have to know the Monkees' history in order to know what's going on.
So that makes me wonder though, if I saw this in the theater, I probably wouldn't have gotten it, because you don't back and then you don't know a lot of the backstory of what's going on. You know, maybe you get a little blurb in Variety, but who's reading Variety in 1968? You know, we don't have Entertainment Weekly. You're not getting these backstories of what's really transpiring. We just know that these guys are funny, and they come out every week and they do silly antics and sing a song, cut a couple albums. So like I said, as a parent walking in here with a kid who was a fan of that show, I would have been horrified. I honestly would have been. I would have walked out with my kid in tow.
I think it would have been the Vietnam footage that would have done it for me.
It's a little too close to home.
Yeah.
No, that's tough, but it is a product of its time. No.
So what kind of buckets would we give?
I went really low initially, but you really talked it up for me. I'm going to go 3 now.
You're going to go 3? Okay.
I'm going to go 3. I know it's much higher for you.
Yeah, I love this. The music, I think, is fantastic. The Porpoise song, which opens and closes.
Oh, yes.
One of the greatest achievements. It's one of their greatest achievements. Music.
But again, this is probably the first time I've ever heard any of these songs.
Right.
You know,
this is a solid 4.25. I would give it.
There you go.
A little bit more than 4 for me.
This is, you know, your history's right there on your sleeve.
And again, this is out of 5, so this is very high for me. 4.25 buckets.
Very high.
This is as good a time as ever to reintroduce our old maligned confessional segment.
Confessionals.
Now, I want to know who your favorite Beatle is and who your favorite Monkee is.
Well, my favorite Monkee is Mickey.
Hands down, Mickey.
Hands down, Mickey. He just, like, he had all the goofy lines. He had, you know, I want to be that guy in the room. You know, Mike was the stoic one. Peter, he was the rational one. Davy was the pretty boy. And that's never going to be me. And so Mickey is the jokester. Mickey is the guy in the room who is going to go out of his way to make someone laugh at the expense of himself.
And Mickey is my son's favorite. And he was mine as a kid as well. But as time has gone on, I think I appreciate the dry humor of Nesmith more and more. Because I see myself as him, as the quiet guy in the corner that says something funny every once in a while. So I really like Mike. Yeah.
Very dry. Yeah.
Yep.
As for Beatles, geez, I'd lean. I'm gonna have to say George Harrison.
I agree. I've always loved George. I've always loved George.
I felt the most for him as a person during this special, during this series,
because you can see him trying to introduce his songs and just being ignored.
Down.
Yeah.
And but now knowing what came out of him afterwards, and again, this, we talk about the fact that looked like it was literally shot yesterday. And to know that he is gone, John Lennon's gone. But every time I hear My Sweet Lord, like it chokes me up because here he is singing about, I've waited so long to meet you, God. And now he did. He got to meet him. And it's very poignant.
Or all things must pass.
Yeah.
Which is about passing.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a bit of ahead of his curve on some of this stuff. And it's unfortunately they got overshadowed. He is part of the conglomerate that is the Beatles. You will always have McCartney and Lennon. Those two names are synonymous.
I always liked George because he was the quiet one. Again, the same reasons why I like Mike the most as my favorite Monkee. But also watching this, it really, he reveals himself to be the most pragmatic. He's the most practical of the Beatles. I love that when everybody's talking about a cruise ship, he's like, this is insane.
I'm not doing that. Has anybody stopped to think this through?
Yeah. The Monkees have bled into Beatles lore. If you've ever seen the promo film for A Day in the Life, Mike Nesmith is there at the recording.
Oh, get out of
A
here.
Day in the Life. Was John Lennon's guest because this was at the height of Monkey Mania in England and in the US.
That's crazy.
And they became friends with the Beatles during that.
Oh, wow. That's kind of wild. The one thing we never talked about during Get Back is Peter Sellers shows up.
Yes,
and he
does.
Literally walks in, and I think he's like, "Hey, I'm Peter Sellers. I'm at the top of my game here." And
it's very awkward. It's very awkward.
He gets up and walks out, and it's just like, "Oh, who was that? Oh, that was Peter Sellers. He's always going to do something funny for us."
And the reason being is because the reason that they're in that studio is because Ringo was filming a movie with Peter Sellers on the next stage over, The Magic
Caveman?
Christian.
Oh.
No, not Caveman. That's one. That's one we'll have to do.
A lot of Zug. What a movie that is. Do yourself a favor, go check out Get Back by all means. Take it in small doses if you have to, but I think it is something that everyone needs to see just to kind of just to put it in the context of
I agree.
Where these guys are, whether you're a huge Beatles fan or just a casual fan, they made a huge impact on everything they touched, whether it was music. And as far as Head, go watch it if you can find it.
I think you can get it on YouTube. I think it is available, not professionally put up there, but
no, you said Shout Factory has the
no, Rhino has the
Rhino.
Blu-ray. I actually have a Blu-ray box set of the entire series, the movie.
Oh, nice.
There's a bunch of bonus features on there as well. So it's
see,
well worth
that.
the money. Cost me a pretty penny, but it's well worth the money for Monkees fans.
Nice.
Yes, love them both equally, the Beatles and the Monkees.
There you go.
So next week, we are still not covering No Way Home. And I've already seen it. I've already seen it, and it is. I am chomping
to talk about this.
I am chomping to talk about this thing.
I have to just avoid. There may be a solid week before I get to see this movie.
Yeah. Do not look at the internet
right before Christmas. Listen, I got.
Don't look at the internet at all before you go to see it.
I will say that the sparse number of times I've gone on Facebook, most of the people who have seen it have been very diligent in not revealing anything.
Good.
So,
all right. So in the week after next, we'll be doing No Way Home.
Yes.
But next week, we are having a Swayze fest.
We are manly men watching manly movies about men. This is
perhaps the manliest manly movie of all time. Roadhouse will be our main feature next week.
Yeah. Is that what you thought you were getting for Christmas, kids? Roadhouse review?
But that's what you're getting. That's what it's going to be.
Hear what we pair it up with.
We're not stopping with Swayze at Roadhouse.
No, we got to listen. If you're going down the Swayze road, you got to go all in.
You got it all in.
Do we go Ghost? No. Do we go Dirty Dancing?
Nope.
No.
Tu Wong Fu? Nope.
No.
We're talking Steel Dawn.
Oh man.
I've never seen this before. I've never seen it. So this is going to be something.
I can honestly say I don't think I've ever seen it either.
We'll watch it and we will talk about it next week.
But that's next week. Until then, thanks as always.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next week.
How's about some steam?
Steam.
That's what Sonny Liston says when they're in the steam room.
Oh, that's right. You already lost me.
Hello, everybody. If you liked the podcast you just heard, then please follow TMI on all of our social media outlets. First and foremost, email us at tmipodcast2018@gmail.com. That is tmipodcast2018@gmail.com.
And you can follow us on Twitter at TMI_podcast2018. Stop over, say hi, give us a compliment. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Make sure you follow us on Instagram as well, which is also TMI_podcast2018.
And of course, we are on Facebook, facebook.com/TMI Podcast 2018. And it should be noted, we also have a community page, so join the forum.
And if you like to watch YouTube, you can see us at TMI Podcast 2018, all one word. Look for the popcorn bucket.
Popcorn bucket. Or you could just go to our website, which has every link there, TMIconfessionalspodcast.com. And we'll see you at the concession stand.
We'll save some popcorn for you.
You fuzzy wuzzy.